hi everyone. Thank you so much again for being here. I'm Grace Randazzo. I work here at Mile High United Way. I am so excited for our panelists to be sharing all of their expertise and insight with all of you today. Just to talk a little bit about why we're doing this session. When we were starting to plan the summit, I knew that advocacy was a really important topic that I wanted to tackle, and one that we're seeing pop up more and more in corporate social responsibility and what people are expecting of companies that they work with or buy things from or whatever it might be. So I know that the impact we can have together when we pool resources and we bring our voices together, that can be vital to how we interact with our community and how we center the work that we do on the issues that our community is facing. So in Mile High United Way, a lot of the work that we do does address the immediate needs of our community. And we work directly in partnership with our community's leaders and the members of the community, just to make sure that everything we're doing really is centered on what they need right now. But in addition to meeting these immediate needs, how are we working to enact change that actually addresses the root causes of the inequities that they're experiencing? Using our voices, resources, and power to advocate for a more equitable society is how we can affect and enact change long term. So what's advocacy and why does it matter? Oh, these got out of order. So corporate social advocacy can be thought of as when a company is using its audience, its marketing, business strategy, and other resources to support a cause, whether it's social, political, or environmental. And these are just a few stats that I wanted to share with you. 93% of employees believe that companies should be leading with purpose. 59% believe it's no longer acceptable for companies to be silent on social justice issues, especially what's been happening over the last year. 87% of people say that stakeholders and not just shareholders are most important to a company's long-term success. So your voice matters. And 76% of Americans think that companies need to make more progress on advancing DE&I in the workplace. So there's a lot of work that can and should be done in the advocacy space from an individual perspective, from a company perspective, and that is what we are here to talk about today. So just to go over what we're expecting today, our amazing guest panel will take it from me in just a moment, moderated by Rowena Naidu. Before I turn it over to our amazing panel, I just want to introduce Rowena really quickly. Rowena is Mile High United Way's Senior Director of Policy and Impact Investing. She works with our board and committees to support legislative priorities that impact our clients and improve their lives. She also oversees our Strategic Investment Grants program, which I'm hoping a few of you have been a part of. It supports local nonprofits across Denver and the Colorado area that do meaningful work in education, basic needs, including housing and food access, and economic opportunity. Just recently, Rowena and dozens of volunteers reviewed over 100, 150 applications, it could be more, for support, and with the approval of the board, we were able to give over $7 million away to 100 organizations. They're doing really amazing work on emergency and basic needs. So congratulations, Rowena. I know this is a really powerful program that you lead. So I will turn it over to you now and our lovely panel.
Thank you, Grace. Good afternoon, everybody. I am excited to be here. I'm honored to be a moderator, and I am thrilled to be alongside our panelists, Adib Khan and Ellen Sandberg. Adib Khan is the Executive Director for Delta Dental Colorado Foundation and Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility for Delta Dental Colorado. He has led corporate social responsibility efforts at TIAA, is a Mile High United Way alum, and is a well-known leader in the community. When Adib isn't leading Delta Dental Colorado's incredible community engagement work, he spends his time supporting early childhood education and local nonprofits through his board service with the Denver Metro Leadership Foundation, executives partnering to invest in children, and the Daniels College of Business. He also serves as commissioner on the Early Childhood Leadership Commission. I think most importantly, Adib and I have climbed a mountain together, and he is the reason why I work at Mile High United Way. Our other panelist today is Ellen Sandberg, who is Vice President of Client and Community Relations at PNC Bank for Colorado, and I am a proud PNC Bank member since about 2004. Since 2018, Ellen has successfully established PNC Bank as a champion of corporate investment in early childhood care and education and in arts and culture. Ellen has played key roles in respected corporate giving programs since 2001. She was a founding member of the Western Union Foundation, Vice President of Community Relations for First Data, and President of the First Data Foundation. She also served as Vice President of Community Investment for the global engineering firm CH2M Hill, which is now Jacobs Engineering, and she was the founding executive director of the CH2M Hill Foundation. Currently, Ellen serves on the board of directors of Philanthropy Colorado, Colorado Business Committee for the Arts, and volunteers her time on committees for Colorado's American Heart Association, the Downtown Denver Partnership, and Mile High United Way. Oh my goodness, both of you are just incredible. And as you can see, they're thoughtful, they're forward-thinking, and they're experienced leaders who are going to share their wisdom with us today. So let's get started. We are living in a time when advocacy is becoming mainstream. Grace shared some compelling data points. And by the power of our thumbs these days, we've all become armchair advocates. We're able to retweet calls to action, or we can like policy positions, and corporate advocacy seems to be following suit. It's no longer about stodgy political lobbying for profit motives. These days, it's about being vocal and making impacts on social, political, economic, and environmental issues. Ideally, it has the goal of improving society and addressing systemic issues. All right, Adib and Ellen, what does advocacy mean to you, specifically in your roles? Adib, I'll have you kick us off, please.
Sure, and thank you, Rowena, for that great introduction, and also just for everybody being here for this conversation. I think when I think of advocacy, I think about it as using the power of your voice and your network and your influence to affect change. And so, as a company, depending on, your position, depending on your industry, there's a lot of opportunities to use that voice and use that power to create change. And so, I think there's also us as individuals, like you mentioned. I think we as individuals have power. And, when we are even inside our company, not even externally, how do we advocate for issues inside of our company as an individual, as an employee, as a team member, so that the company might want to take a bigger stance on an issue? I think these are all questions when you bring up the idea of advocacy, especially in a corporate setting. There's a lot of different ways of approaching it. But ultimately, I think if we within our own individual companies took stock and really took an inventory of all of the different stakeholders that we have influence with, I think it would kind of showcase the power you truly have in terms of your voice. And if you were to come out in support of something, the kind of influence that you can have, both kind of positively and negatively. So there's a lot of power there, and it's just about leveraging it more than anything.
I love that. Thank you, Adib. There are different components at different levels, and it's necessary for all of us in our companies, in our organizations, to get involved. Ellen, how about you? What does advocacy mean to you specifically in your role?
Thank you, and also super honored to be here. Always wonderful to be side by side someone like Adib and learn from each other as much as we're going to be, teaching others, about advocacy and what we do. But so everything that Adib said, and I think that, being an advocate for something, I think is really is looking and trying to find the voiceless that are out in the community and in the world, and try to figure out how we, with our power, as Adib said, and the numbers and our brand, could be that voice for for the voiceless. And you know, we have found that that has worked in the early childhood education space, that it is now working in the racial and social justice space. But to really be, and that's, you know, that's really how you're going to have true impact in advocacy, is to try to identify what issues are out there, but who doesn't have a platform to talk about them. And could we be that platform to talk about them and make change and be their voice, essentially? Because they would, I'm sure anybody would love to have that kind of platform that a company has. We have it, and let's try to use it for the voiceless.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ellen. That's really important. I do want to issue a reminder that we are doing this on a virtual platform where any number of things can go wrong. Right now, somebody is mowing my lawn, and in a few moments, my dog may start barking. So please bear with us if anything like that happens. We're just going to try and go with it. My next question to both of you, as you set the stage for what advocacy means to you, building on that, why is engaging in advocacy important to your company? And Ellen, I'll have you start off this time.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that, you know, there is sort of the old adage of, you know, it's important to do well as a company financially, but also do good at the same time. And how does a company differentiate itself, I guess, in the marketplace? And so, you know, and why would you differentiate yourself in the marketplace? Because you want to retain your customers, you want to retain your shareholders, and you want to attract and retain employees. And all of those, I think, factor into the reason why you would stand for an issue. Grace, of course, laid out all of those wonderful statistics, and it makes me proud to be side by side someone like Adib and others I know on this call who do this kind of work, that we know that when we're doing it, we really are not only helping to build our brand in the community and goodwill when we need it, but also to make sure that those employees that we have stay with us, those employees that we want to come to us will come to us because of what we stand for, and that our customers stick with us and, you know, understand that we're more than just a bank, that we have an opportunity to really make social change and are committed to making social change, and we'll do it with any number of people that want to do it with us.
That's amazing, Ellen. And I've heard that brand awareness piece being called social brand advocacy now. I know we have to put a label on everything. I think it's a good direction that our companies are going in. So Adib, I'd love to hear from you. Tell us why engaging in advocacy is important to Delta Dental.
Sure. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, the advocacy is really about improving our society. And also, I think, you know, the big part of advocacy is about changing policy. And so just from kind of a fundamental level, you know, I think with us, we're a mission-related nonprofit. You know, we have a focus on oral health and oral health equity. And so being able to affect change to improve oral health access and utilization, you know, just fundamental to who we are, that's something we have to be involved in. You know, we work with over 4,000 dental providers. We have over 1.5 million members across the state of Colorado. And so just on the oral health issues, we have to be an active voice to ensure that the policies we're putting in place are going to be the best policies for oral health care. So that's kind of fundamental. I think when you go beyond just, you know, the nature of our industry and what we represent, it goes to some of the points that Ellen's making. You know, we're in a war for talent right now. It's a reality that I think a lot of us are facing. You know, there's a lot more power that team members and employees realize that they have, and more, especially with their younger generations, are looking to work in places that have alignment with their values. And so the other part of that is that as a company, you really have to be authentic in living your values. It's one thing to put values on your wall. It's another thing to actually be authentic and be open and be willing to take risks to stand up for those values. And I think when you're talking about recruiting and retaining talent, people want to see your authenticity when it comes to living your values, more so now than perhaps any other time. And so, the big part of it is being pushed by the individual, the team members. And I think that we're realizing again and again, being reminded about the power that individuals have in really pushing not only government, but also the way that our companies are reacting. And most fundamentally, I think why it's important is because, there's a lot of power in business. The business community holds a ton of influence and power, and there's a responsibility with that. So when we talk about things like corporate responsibility, we have to analyze what is a responsible utilization of our power in terms of influence, in terms of our networks, in terms of, us positioning ourselves on certain social issues. And so, I think part of it is that it's fulfilling our responsibility as a company to utilize our position for the advancement of what's best for society and what's best for our mission. So it's really just about being authentic and about doing what we have to do to be authentic. And, I think those are fundamental. But then you look at some of the after effects, and it's really about recruiting, retaining talent, improving your brand value and perception. And in some ways, you're risking brand value too, because not every position is obviously 100%. There's a lot of conflict, and we know about the divisions we have in our society right now. So there's always going to be a cost benefit component to it. And I think the real advocacy is when you're doing and standing up for the right thing, even though you may have a very significant risk towards your business and your bottom line, which, could potentially diminish your power and could affect your ability to advocate on other issues in the long run. So all of those things really need to be weighed and analyzed to be effective, I think, with advocacy.
Thanks, Adib. Gosh, you went through so many really important things there, and I want to just underscore the authenticity piece, because people can really see through it if you're not authentic, if you don't really believe those values, and if you're not living those values, particularly as a company, and that's really important. So thank you for bringing that up. Ellen, how does PNC decide in which advocacy efforts to engage? So what guides your process as a company?
Well, I would say that, as we define advocacy today, or it really is where is PNC putting a stake in the ground and saying we're going to put our people, and we're going to put money, and we're going to put, as Adib said, our brand out there and stand for something. And so I'll just tell the story that I've heard as to why PNC has been involved is involved in early childhood education and support for programs for children, birth to age 5. And it really started out with this concept of banks can very often give all over the place because there's so much community need. And at a certain point, more than 15 years ago, our CEO said, why don't we ask our employees and why don't we ask our customers what issue matters to them the most? And it came back resoundingly that care for early childhood and children in the earliest years was the most important to them. And one would say, what does that have to do with banking? What does that have to do with home loans and car loans and things like that? It really doesn't, right? It's very different, but it was a value that we knew was important. And so, I think to quickly answer your question, we really asked the question to the people that mattered most to us and listened to it and responded to it and decided that we would take early childhood education on. And, now 15 plus years later, it's been a $500 million investment, and we've reached millions and millions of children, and we believe have changed lives. So the process way back when has been listening. And then I think that now in recent times, with what's going on with racial and social justice, again, it's really looking out at the landscape and seeing now what really matters to the world, what really matters to us as a bank that is now nationwide, and what matters to the individuals that live in our communities. I mean, they might not be our customers, but that doesn't matter. They're our community, and we want to serve them and respond to what their needs might be. And so later on, we can talk about our $1 billion commitment to end systemic racism, or at least help to end systemic racism, and why that was. Again, what was the process? The process was listening, looking, and then, quite honestly, deciding to be bold and take a risk, like Adib said.
That's difficult for a company sometimes to stand on the platform and take that risk, but I'm glad PNC does that, and I'm excited to see more and more companies being able to do that. Thank you for sharing, Ellen. Adib, you've touched on the risks that companies may face from not deciding to engage in advocacy, but there are certainly benefits that go along with that. Can you share a particularly important advocacy campaign that Delta Dental engaged in that had some positive results?
Well, I mean, this past year, one of the areas that we took a more significant stance on, it was, as Ellen mentioned, in early childhood. Both of our organizations, I work with Ryan Beiser, who's the president of PNC, on the Early Childhood Leadership Commission. There's been a lot of movement in that space specifically to really focus on universal preschool, bring more resources and opportunity for families to access early childhood services and care. And so as a company and as our foundation, we really looked at the issue with a lot of data. So as Ellen was mentioning, in terms of how you really go about making decisions, part of it is going to be, there's those long-term issues that we're going to say, we're going to focus on this for years to come. And to get to those positions, we've really had to get a lot of data. We work with our partner, the Colorado Health Institute, to analyze what are the most important issues that we can be focusing on in terms of need. And then we work with other partners to do policy analysis of other states around the country to see what is working in other states and what are things that we can advocate to bring to Colorado to really move the needle on issues. And one of the big ones was around early childhood. And this past year, it was proposed for the creation of a new Department of Early Childhood, us being kind of one of less than 10 states that would have a dedicated department with a cabinet level position focused on early childhood, everything from health to education and care. And so I had the opportunity to testify twice on the actual bill itself, and really represent not only our company and our foundation, but also represent organizations like Colorado Succeeds and EPIC that represent the business community to really push forward a broader stance at, yes, we absolutely, as a business community, as an individual company, as a nonprofit foundation, believe that this is what we need in Colorado, and there's a ton of reasons why. And so we used our voice in a number of ways to push that forward, and it had great support, bipartisan support, and was eventually passed. And we're now in a process of really figuring out what that's actually going to look like. But I think it just shows that, what I found was during that process of advocating and testifying, the business community holds a ton of sway, because obviously on certain social issues, the nonprofit community, even the early childhood community on this specific issue, are going to have a voice that can be somewhat predictable. But oftentimes on social issues, the business community, doesn't always have the same alignment, or will oftentimes take a back seat or not get involved. And so it really does carry a lot of weight with lawmakers when representatives of the business community are getting behind social issues. And so I think there's obviously a lot of power and opportunity there for us to do more as a business community in that space. There's a ton of risks in not engaging on these issues. And so we have to kind of stay focused. The other one we're working on now is really around workforce. The oral healthcare workforce in the state of Colorado and across the entire country is not very diverse. And we're, engaging in a more like a 10-year, but we've committed to 5 campaign to really change that and provide more opportunities to BIPOC populations to seek prosperous careers in oral health care. So we're going to do a lot of focus on that. And that means grant funding, that means philanthropy, but it also, at the end of the day, is really about policy change. You know, corporate giving and philanthropy are like just tiny, tiny drops in the bucket at the end of the day in terms of power and ability to change influence. I was just having lunch with Susan Steele, who runs the Buell Foundation, and they're dedicated solely to early childhood. And they were able to, they give out about $20+ million a year on early childhood issues. But Proposition EE, which we passed this last year, raised over $300 million annually for universal preschool in the state of Colorado. So the reality is that us as funders and as, you know, philanthropists, we can definitely make an impact. We can prove and test theories and showcase with data what works and what doesn't work. But to really make that significant long-term change, we need to affect policy. And so that's why we got to get more involved into not only showcasing what works, having the data that backs it up, and then using our influence and our power to push those agendas forward. And that, to me, that's the big power of what philanthropy can do, is really be a proving ground for what works, and then be able to take that to scale through advocacy and policy.
I've been trying to keep from jumping up and applauding every time you say something, Adib, because you're saying all the right things. It's so important for companies to take that next step beyond philanthropy and engage in advocacy. And the work that Delta Dental has done with so many of our other partners on the creation of the Office of Early Childhood is just a huge win for our state. And we're looking for more of those little wins. I'm going to take a question from one of our audience members to both of you. How can companies empower employees to get involved in advocacy efforts, both in their personal lives and through work? And Adib, you mentioned how powerful the voice of corporations are when it comes to advocacy. Is that next step trying to empower employees to also take action? Adib, why don't you kick us off there?
That's an interesting question, you know, and I think just to kind of follow up a little bit on what Ellen was speaking to earlier, you know, I think there's certain policy stances where we can get a lot of data and we can gain a really strong understanding for our position and why we believe in what we believe in. And I think those are the positions where it can be a lot easier to advocate on those issues with our team members. And even if it's not about policy change, you know, one of the things that we've really embraced internally is around creating a carbon neutral company. So we've set a 3-year goal around carbon neutrality. We are, you know, we've built our new office space with the most efficient kind of fixtures and lighting and different things that we can do to save on energy. But at the end of the day, in order for us to get there, it's really about employee behavior. And so there's an education component and an advocacy component that we need to engage in our team members with to help us improve our practice around sustainability, help us improve our practice around commuting and using RTD or riding your bike to work, help us to get people familiar with what goes in the compost bin and what goes in the recycling bin, and then connecting those individuals with organizations in the community who are really leading change on those efforts, so that if their personal passions are aligned, they can really get more involved in those opportunities. But there's also going to be areas where I think you're probably crossing a line when you're asking individuals to advocate potentially on things that, or at least maybe individuals might feel that way, advocate for things that might be somewhat controversial. And so there's always a balance, I think, that you have to take on when you're kind of trying to get team members to become part of the advocacy initiative. But I do think that there's plenty of opportunity for us to be able to provide outlets and resources and education for our team members so that we can inspire them to take a bigger position. And I really think that's the role of companies and where we can kind of take a stance.
Great, thanks, Adib. Ellen, what's your response to that?
I was thinking about the organizations in Colorado that have been so effective in policy. Mile High, you know, United Way is one of them, certainly, but Adib mentioned executives partnering to invest in children, Colorado Succeeds, and even the funding community so collaborative in this state, and in particular, let's just say on early childhood education, that the way that that PNC involves, at least PNC Colorado involves employees in advocacy, is engaging our employees in those organizations. So our employees volunteer for Mile High United Way, and thus they're there supporting the advocacy that Mile High United Way is doing, and learns about it through engaging with your organization. Or our employees will sit on the boards or committees of Colorado Succeeds or EPIC, or quite frankly, the Downtown Denver Partnership or the Denver Chamber of Commerce. All of these organizations have components of and have committees that, if we can get our employees who are interested to engage in those organizations in that way, they're getting right there into the fabric of what is happening in the state. And they're hearing, firsthand from experts and really being able to voice what they believe and what they think. And so that has been the way for us in Colorado to engage our employees in advocacy, is really connecting them to the organizations that are giving voice to those changes. We've seen it firsthand how it's really sparked interest and engagement from our employees when they can be there on the front lines in those committees.
I love that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, a follow-up of a way in which we've essentially implemented what Ellen's speaking to is we have a different organization each month that we partner with at Delta Dental. So we essentially have 12 key partners, each with a different issue that they're focused on. So we just in July, we worked with Habitat for Humanity. This month in August, we're working with Special Olympics. Next month in September, we're working with COMOM, which is the Mission of Mercy. So it's focused on oral health care. But each organization is able to provide kind of a lunch and learn focused on kind of their issues and how they're really advancing their issues. And on top of that, there's also meaningful volunteer opportunities. So it's really about allowing our employees to be exposed to a number of different issues. We work with Denver Dumb Friend League. So whether your interest and personal passion for advocacy is around, Special Olympics as an organization, or Habitat for Humanity and housing, or working with an organization like Denver Dumb Friends League, the best thing we can do is get you connected with that organization, have opportunities to learn about how that organization achieves its mission, provide valuable opportunities for you to volunteer and get your hands dirty with that organization. And then hopefully our individual team members will want to take that next step, become donors on their own, or become volunteers on their own and engage further with that organization. And I think that's a great practice for all organizations, companies to do with their team members.
Thanks, Adib. Folks, I hope you are taking notes, because these are amazing ideas from Ellen and Adib. Right now, I'd like to turn to Marissa. Marissa, you put a great question in the chat, and I'd like you to unmute, please, and ask your question of our panelists.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rowena. So hearing all of the amazing work that you are both doing in the early childhood and childcare space made me think about all of the headlines we've seen recently, in particular about women leaving the workforce in droves because of lack of childcare in the last year. And I was curious, do you have any methods in place to sort of track the long-term benefits of investing in early childcare, as far as employees who are entering or re-entering the workforce because they have dependable, affordable childcare?
I'll just jump in to say that's really the crux of it, is ensuring that there is access to high quality early care and education for children. And I think that's it's not just about that there is care out there, that it is, but that it is high quality. And so that and I think we're all really working hard to ensure that, especially with the ballot initiative that came out and the kind of funding that Adib was referencing, right? And that workforce pipeline is really the toughest thing. I think one of the toughest things that we're facing now is who is going to be providing that care once there's funding and once there is tuition, reimbursement for families. And so, really that and I've only been in this space for early childhood and I'm just learning it now. I've only really been learning it for about 3 years. And so where I feel like we come down on it is I don't really know exactly if the needle has moved, significantly because of the 15 or 16 years of investment that the PNC has put into it. But I think what I do believe is that that the partnerships that get established and get fostered really sort of the rising waters float all boats. And I don't think that Colorado would be where it is today with that ballot initiative if it weren't for all of the work and all of the investment that the Buell Foundation has been putting in, that the Rose Community Foundation has been putting in, that so many funders have been putting into this effort and Delta Dental for so long. So that I think that it feels like what we do a lot of is respond to whatever crisis is in front of us, and we actually solve it in a really meaningful way. It feels like what we look to what the next crisis is and try to solve it. But I'm not sure if we've been able to really look back 100%, and know exactly how lives have changed. I know that there has been reports written, and I'm sure that the information is there. It's just that my observation really is that where Colorado has been so amazing is looking around the corner, seeing what the issue is going to be in the next 5 and 10 years and driving at it and solving it. And so that's where we should take a lot of solace, I think, but also realize that it really does take a lot of work and a lot of change at so many different levels. And the Early Childhood Leadership Commission that Adib serves on is one of those really critical places for those solutions to be resolved.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we obviously saw a huge departure in the workforce, specifically with working mothers who had no other option than to be home and be with kids. And it was already hard enough pre-COVID, with terms of quality childcare. I think the statistics I remember is that only 1 in 3 families could find quality childcare to meet their needs pre-COVID. And then since that time, the data I can remember is from a few months back, but 10% of early childcare centers essentially permanently closed their doors during the pandemic and will not reopen. So then you have a further decrease. And so when you talk about the impact on business, I mean, I don't care what industry you're in right now, people are struggling to find talent to retain and to recruit. And it is a problem regardless of industry. And a big reason for that is because of working mothers who can no longer re-enter the workforce. And the unfortunate thing is that you're still in a situation of uncertainty. I have a 7, 5, and 2-year-old in my household, and you cannot predict what the situation is going to be for your kids. We're lucky that we have a nanny that we've had since my daughter was born, who is a reliable childcare resource. But for a lot of families, that's not a reality. And so more businesses now are starting to look at least and invest in early child care solutions in their own doors. I know Guild Education has recently opened a child care center on site. I know that other companies are looking at it, and I serve on the board of Epic. And one of the big things that Epic is leading as an organization, and Nicole Rail's done a really great job with this work, is helping companies to really do that assessment and understand what it would take to stand up a child care center. And we've gotten people have outreached. The city of Fort Collins just recently outreached and said, hey, can you help us figure this out? We've had other companies that have reached out and said, hey, can you help us figure this out? And so there's a process that's starting to happen where companies are saying it's no longer something that we can kind of have our hands removed from. We have to be much more involved in our employees and our team members and their childcare. And so there's a lot there that needs to be figured out. But I am, I think the business community needs to take a much bigger approach in terms of being involved in providing quality childcare, especially for our team members, because it's a business imperative. If we want to be able to recruit and retain talent, we need to be actively involved in childcare. And the good news is that we as a state have committed a lot more dollars towards early childcare and education. We're standing up a new department of early childhood. We've got more funding for universal preschool. We've put in place full-day pre-K or full-day kindergarten for kids. These are great investments into providing some of those resources, but we're not there yet. I'm hopeful that, some of the budget initiatives we're hearing about at a federal level will infuse more dollars that we can utilize. But ultimately, as a state, if we want to see more of our economy prospering, we need to have our workforce fully active. And in order to get there, one of the specific focus areas is working mothers and getting them back to work. And in order to do that, you have to have childcare. And we're just not there yet. And so it's going to be a long haul, but that's the goal of all this work that we're really trying to push forward. And one of the big reasons for that is so that our working mothers can have the option of being able to work while also knowing that their kids are getting quality care.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Adib. So we've talked about issues outside of your focus as a company and you taking positions on those issues. But have you looked at or maybe adjusted policies that needed to be updated internally to your organization? What internal policies did you take a look at? Did you change or update, and why? Ellen, I'll start with you.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. So, we know that there are issues that have come up in the last year around social justice, around race and equity, and lots of companies stepped forward and said, what can we do? Which is wonderful. We want people to take action. We want people to get involved. But has PNC, because I know other companies have done this, they've looked internally, are there things that needed to change? If you're looking at taking an active role in social justice, were there things that needed to change internal to the company to be in alignment with the stance that they were taking externally? Were there things that you looked at as a company?
I really don't know if I can answer that question because I think it's above my pay grade in Pittsburgh at the headquarters of our bank. And I guess, the way I want to answer that question is to say that I think we were very aware of what was happening in the world because of what we're, as a bank, obligated to do from a Community Reinvestment Act standpoint. We understood many, many years ago that there was redlining and that people were not getting access to capital to start businesses, and that they weren't getting home loans, and they were for racial reasons. And so, banks were, kind of forced to look at their processes and change them externally. That doesn't mean that a bank then has to change itself inside, except for that what I see very, very much and very real and very authentic, as Adib has said from the very beginning, is our commitment to LGBTQ rights, women, different racial minorities in our company, and how we allow and foster, I don't mean allow, but foster them to gather, to get together, to learn from one another, and how we try to bring those values into the meetings with our customers and our clients as well. So I feel as if, we had a very, very strong basis and foundation for that. And when George Floyd was murdered and Black Lives Matter became a very, very prominent issue, and our cities were transformed because of it, we had a very, very focused conversation internally about what that means for us. We heard from our Black executives, as a matter of fact, who run banks in cities like Washington, D.C. and Seattle, who said, I still put my wallet on my dashboard when I drive somewhere, because no matter what, I'm still afraid that if a cop pulls me over, I can't reach for that. To hear that from a highly paid executive in the bank was a very powerful thing for all of us in the bank to hear. And that was the authenticity, that was the sharing, and that's really what led to a reorganization internally about how we would elevate corporate social responsibility and elevate diversity, equity, and inclusion to a place where it is as important as what our profit and loss statements are.
That's really powerful, Ellen. Thank you for sharing that. Adib, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I spoke to it a little bit earlier when we were talking about like going green as a company and how we really needed to change a lot of the different ways we do business and who we work with kind of externally. One of the other things, when I started in January of last year at Delta, Colorado, one of my kind of long-term goals that I had from my boss, Helen, was really to help stand up and start our inclusion and diversity initiative. And after the events of George Floyd, we really accelerated that process and have made tons of progress in terms of standing up our I&D Council. We've done our organizational assessment to really look at everything we do internally and get the feedback from our team members. So we worked with an outside consultant to do a really thorough examination of where we currently stand with regards to our own impressions. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And that will continue. We're building now our action plan based on what the organizational assessment showed us in terms of where we do need to work on. But, it comes down to the fact that we go back to authenticity, right? If you are going to be coming out on a social issue, regardless of what it is, you are essentially a glass house. And so you need to make sure that you have your own stuff in order first before you start, I think, going out and promoting objectives externally. On the foundation side, a lot of information, there was a lot of public statements that came out from companies and foundations amid the George Floyd scandal. We saw that again, I think, with some of the hatred towards Asian American populations. And when that happened, I got some questions from some folks of like, are we going to put out a statement? And honestly, I had to stop and say, you know what, I just don't feel like putting out a statement is really going to affect the kind of change. While I do feel like companies taking stances and putting their positions publicly is very important, at that time for us as a foundation, what really needed to happen was for us to take a deep dive into everything we do, how we fund, how we reach grantees, how we are reaching out to communities that are underrepresented or that don't typically apply for our grants, how we're setting up our programs. Do we require too much? Are we not requiring enough? These were the kind of questions of how do we set up the policies and procedures as a foundation so that we are standing up for the kind of rights we believe in versus putting out a statement that says we believe in something. And so that was really important for us. And so we've begun a process as a foundation, working with another outside consultant, Carla Mestes, who is terrific. We actually just had a workshop this past Friday where we spent a whole day as a team really talking and diving deep on these issues. And the goal of it is to examine our policies and procedures as a foundation, examine what we have on our website, examine how we work and interact and engage with our grantees, really look at all of that and look at it through a lens of equity, inclusion, and diversity, and be able to say, are we authentically being an organization that's standing against racism? Are we authentically being an organization that is doing its part to build up communities that have been oppressed in the past? And it's going to take time and energy, and it's really going to take a thorough examination, and it's going to take a lot of questioning and discussion. And that's the real work. it's easy, I think, sometimes to put out a statement. It's a lot harder to do that work of saying that, do we have our own stuff in order, and can we look at things from a critical lens and say that we have an opportunity to improve, even if there are things that, you know, are difficult and challenging, but engaging in that is part of the work. And so I'm proud that our team has really embraced this opportunity and that we're taking a deep dive, but there's no quick fix. It's a process, and we're engaging in that process right now, and I'm proud that we are doing that work.
I love that. It's not easy, but certainly necessary. So I have a final two-part question for both of you before we wrap up. What advice would you give a company that wants to be more engaged in advocacy? And what would you tell leaders who may be a little apprehensive about getting engaged in advocacy when their employees are eager to do so? Ellen?
Sure. I guess having been in the realm of corporate giving for a while, you know, very often it does. You have to speak different languages to different people within the company. You have to speak HR language to HR people. You have to speak sort of numbers to finance. You have to speak just whatever. There's all sort of different languages that you use when you're trying to influence from within. But you know, the advice that I would give is to, I think, you know, sort of first of all, understand how your company actually, you know, makes money. And then once you understand how your company really makes money, then figure out that there is probably a tie between how money comes in and, you know, what your company stands for, and to try to make that connection that there really is and can be a very valuable return on investment when you stand for something, and when your employees know you're authentic and you stand for it. And so, you know, that to me, I think is one of the sort of obvious advices of sort of the return on investment aspect of corporate social responsibility. But I think the way Grace started out the presentation was really powerful. Those numbers are real about what people believe companies should be doing in the marketplace, and that if you're tone deaf to that, at some point in time, it's going to affect your bottom line. And those numbers, we see them in our sort of corporate and charitable realms. Maybe we see them all the time. Those numbers really aren't very visible to a lot of people who are the decision makers in your company. So I really think leading with data way that you can advance a social cause. And as much as we may really want to stand up and for a certain social cause because we believe it's the right thing to stand for, backing it up with data and backing it up with evidence is one of the strongest ways to be able to really get your company to be active in advocacy.
Thank you, Ellen. Adib?
I mean, I totally agree with that sentiment. I think there's a risk, absolutely, and being able to get involved, especially when you're talking about advocacy. So I think you have to do a risk analysis and be honest with yourself. I mean, if you just want to try to push forward an agenda because you're passionate about it and emotional, that's not the way to do business. You know, I think that's definitely a principle that can inspire the work that needs to be done, but looking at it from a data perspective is always going to be the most effective way to really convince the other people who you're working around to move the agenda forward. I mean, when we were talking about going carbon neutral as a dental insurance company, there was resistance that existed in there about people who, you know, just fundamentally don't think that climate change is a reality. And so how did we present that information? In all reality, when we presented it to those teams specifically, we never even addressed the issue of climate change. We spoke about it looking at our 5 biggest clients. Each one of them has a green initiative, and each one of them is pushing towards carbon neutrality. And so if we are trying to create value alignment with our clientele, just from a business principle perspective, there is a reason for us to take this initiative forward. And so looking at it from fundamental business principles, You know, I've heard, you know, with some of these from some individuals in the community that some of the agendas that are pushed forward right now that are trying to promote more diversity in the workforce and more prosperity, like Prosper Colorado, you know, that it's really something that can be perceived as an anti-white initiative. And the reality is that when you look at the data itself and you just focus on the data, that it tells us that there's a huge missed economic opportunity, that when we don't allow certain populations because of their race and ethnicity to seek prosperity and maximize their potential, that we are failing the economy as a whole. And so I think that there's an opportunity for folks who are obviously passionate about issues from an emotional standpoint. When we're trying to make change and trying to get our businesses more involved from an advocacy standpoint, we have to start with what the business case is and the business principles behind it. And I think what you'll find is that when you're really honed in on those business principles, that you can make an even stronger case for getting more involved from an advocacy perspective. And that doesn't even touch on, you know, the changing dynamics that we're seeing in the workforce, especially with our Gen Z and millennial generations, who are really pushing companies to have more purpose in what they're doing. And that goes from philanthropy and volunteerism all the way to advocacy. So I really think that Ellen's point is a good one, that start with the data and start with the business principles and do the analysis. It's easy to say no, but when you do the analysis, I think it's going to be a lot easier to say yes. And I think that that's what I would encourage folks to allow them led by.
Awesome. Thank you both. I'm really energized to know that both of you are at the helms of your organizations and leading this work and leading these efforts around corporate social advocacy. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all that you've shared today. And we look forward to seeing what you do next in our community. Grace, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, everyone. This has been a really wonderful and insightful hour, and I have a lot to think about, and I have a lot of ideas just from listening to you for an hour, and I'm hoping a lot of our guests do too, but we're at time, so I will wrap it up. But just everyone, don't forget, if you're passionate about change, you know, you have a powerful voice and you can make a really big difference as an individual, but as a collective, our actions and words have impact. So I will send a little bit about how you can engage next, whether that's through advocacy or education or taking action. That will be in a follow-up email, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you all so much for joining us. It's been great to spend this time with you. And thank you again, Ellen, Adib, and Rowena, for all of your time and expertise and insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone.